Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football, Week 4 in the books. Now we got a new AP poll, top 25 rankings to break down every single year. I tell myself, hey, it's the AP poll. It's not the college football playoff rankings. We don't need to get that worked up every single year. I find myself getting worked up about the AP poll. But I think more importantly, it gives us some opportunity to talk about some teams that have really impressed throughout the first 4 weeks, talk about some teams that we might be fading heading into the rest of 2024. Fired up to get into it now. Before we do, and as always, and most importantly, quite frankly, let it fly in the comment section. I'm going to give you guys my takes. Y'all might not agree with all of my takes. That is the beauty of doing these kind of ranking conversations. Let it fly in the comment section. Who's too high? Who's too low? Who should be in the top 25 that's not? And if y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And I want to start with some teams that I think they have a little bit too low. And I've quite frankly been really impressed by. Let's start with Tennessee coming at number 5. And I'm not necessarily going to get on the table and argue that Tennessee should be above Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia, Texas. That being said, if you're asking me who has been the most impressive team in the country thus far in the 2024 season, I probably would point to that Tennessee team going on the road to Norman, Oklahoma, in one of the more hostile environments that you'll see in all of college football. The first SEC game for Oklahoma, Tennessee largely came in there and handled business. My biggest takeaway from Tennessee is that this defense, it's legit. I think it's one of the best defenses in the country, and they've shown the ability to win kind of that rock fight game where, hey, look, Oklahoma's defense is really good. It was a loud environment. It was hard to get a lot of offense in. Tennessee just swarmed them on defense. I mean, Oklahoma did not really have a shot to move the football all that consistently on the offensive side of the football. And if you want to get into a shootout with this Tennessee team, it's really hard to keep up with them on the scoreboard as well, where you go back to Tennessee back in 2022 when they kind of first burst back onto the scene under Josh Heupel. This Tennessee team could really only win shootouts. Like, they were just going to try to put more points on the scoreboard than the opposing team. I look at this team in 2024 and say they can win these grindy SEC games, but they also can win the shootouts as well. And you look at Tennessee and say, find the weakness on this team. I think they have an elite offensive line. I think it's worth noting. They went on the road and beat Oklahoma without their two starting tackles. Really good quarterback in Nico, difference makers on the outside, and a front seven that I think is a top 10, maybe even top 5 unit in the country. So you look at Tennessee, extremely impressive. And again, I don't know if I'm going to argue that they should be over those 4 teams, but I think I've been most impressed by this Tennessee team. Coming in next, I'm going to go to Miami at number 7. And again, are we going to get on the table and bang the table for Miami to be ranked higher? I think there's an argument for it, certainly. You talk about some of the most impressive teams we've seen. I think it starts with Cam Ward. And Cam Ward is playing like the best quarterback in all of college football throughout the first 4 weeks. I think if the season ended today, he'd be my Heisman vote. But I think more importantly, a really good offensive line, a really, really good front seven. The biggest question mark we had about Miami heading into 2024 was a young and rather inexperienced secondary. They're top 20 in the country in terms of yards per pass given up. So I look at Miami and say, not a lot of boxes that have been left unchecked for Miami, but I think more importantly, every single game they've shown up and taken care of business. And you can't really say that for a lot of these other teams in the top 25. A lot of these teams have struggled at times in the season. Miami, every single week, has really just been dominant. Last one I want to talk about, Clemson at number 17. This Clemson team's so much better than a lot of people give them credit for. The offense is starting to figure it out. You take a look at what you saw against NC State, what you saw against App State, and yeah, to be fair, I don't think those are elite football teams. NC State probably not the team that I thought they were going to be in 2024. We all know this Clemson defense is so legit, and I think this offense starting to put it together, but most importantly, starting to become a little bit more explosive. This Clemson team is going to be a hard out for every single team that they play. And I think that Georgia game, again, that Georgia's a really good football team. There's a reason they're the number 2 team in the country. We're going to talk about them in just a second. Georgia kind of just squeezed them out there. Like, that Clemson offense kind of shot themselves in the foot early in that football game. And then you give Carson Beck and Georgia that many opportunities to start scoring points, they're eventually going to start scoring points. I think if you ran that game back again, I'm not saying I'm picking Clemson to beat Georgia. I think it'd be a more competitive game based on what I've seen from that Clemson offense over the last couple of weeks. The teams that are ranked too high, in my opinion, I want to start with Oklahoma State at 20. Oklahoma State's kind of lived rent free in my mind for the last 2 years. Like when you watch Oklahoma State, they're never that impressive, but they always continue to win football games. Maybe I'm a little salty because I took Oklahoma State to cover the number yesterday when Cam Rising was out with the injury. They kind of got boat raced. And I think the scoreboard had got a little bit closer than really the score was. I look at Oklahoma State and say, one, well-coached team like Mike Gundy just wins games for Oklahoma State, but do they have the difference makers on defense, especially with a guy like Colin Oliver out? Is Alan Bowman that good of a quarterback? I would love to hear from the Oklahoma State fans, but you've seen so many inconsistent performances from Oklahoma State, and quite frankly, you look back at Oklahoma State the last couple of weeks, they lose to Utah with a backup quarterback. They should have lost to Arkansas. Arkansas kind of just gave that football game away in the second half. I look at Oklahoma State and say, I think that's just a little too high, especially losing at home to a backup quarterback for Utah. Last one, Notre Dame. I'm not like super low on Notre Dame. Like they can run the football and play good defense. I still have question marks about that passing attack. I think they moved up 4 spots after beating a MAC team this week. Maybe a little too high. Again, I'm probably not going to bang the table that they are too high. And then finally, I think Kansas State. I'm questioning how good Arizona is. And I think that was kind of the win that Kansas State held their hat on. Look, I think Kansas State's going to be a really good team in 2024, but I also think that Avery Johnson still has a lot of developing to do before I'm picking Kansas State to compete at the highest level in the Big 12 with teams like Utah when Cam Rising gets back. Avery Johnson's going to have a bright future, but you still see some of those growing pains. And quite frankly, I went to bed at half, watched the second half this afternoon or this morning. It spiraled and it got out of hand for Kansas State on the road at BYU. Going at the top and kind of just going top to bottom, Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama. I think Texas, Georgia, Ohio State, Alabama, and Tennessee, they're all really good teams. And you look at Ohio State, hasn't really been tested, but they've certainly looked the part. They have so many weapons on the offensive side of the football. Their defense is pretty much an NFL defense that's playing in college. So Ohio State has certainly looked the part, just hasn't really played that premier competition yet. Texas has, I think, by far the most impressive win, right? Going on the road and just trouncing Michigan. So they should be the number one team. You look at Georgia, struggled against Kentucky, but a really impressive win against Clemson. I'm okay with them at 2. And then Alabama at 4. Again, that's going to get sorted out real quick this Saturday, Georgia, Alabama. Ole Miss at 6. Feel good about it. 7, Miami. 8, Oregon. Penn State is a tricky one. Bowling Green might be a good team. Like Bowling Green gave Texas A&M not just about all they could handle, but they played Texas A&M very, very tight over the weekend. The thing I love about Penn State is that their offense is finally explosive. Now, you want it to be a little bit more efficient, but they're hitting bigger plays. They're putting more points on the board. My biggest question mark about Penn State is that I don't know if the defense is a legitimate top 5 defense in the country like we might have thought. So we're going to have to kind of figure that out as Penn State continues the 2024 season. Utah coming in at number 10. Look, when Cam Rising gets back healthy, like that Utah team's a problem. They have a very good offensive line. They can run the football, legit difference makers on the outside, not only at the tight end position with Brent Keithy, but this is the most talented wide receiver room that Cam Rising has been able to work with. And then obviously a very good defense. Like this Utah team is going to be very good if and when Cam Rising gets healthy. And I'm not holding my breath about Cam Rising. Kyle Whittingham has put a lot of us college football fans through the ringer with the health of Cam Rising. Missouri at number 11. Sleepy start for Missouri, right? Going to overtime at home against Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt's a gritty team. Boston College, I thought they looked solid, but I don't think it was massively impressive. And so you look at Missouri and say, we like how they're constructed, right? Really good offensive line, veteran quarterback in Brady Cook, one of the best wide receivers in the country in Luther Burden. I think Theo Weiss is very good too, and a solid defense. They just haven't necessarily looked like a top 10 team yet. And I think that's why Missouri's sitting there at number 11. Michigan coming in at 12. Look, I think the AP voters have to put Michigan at 12 because they just beat USC, who's sitting there at number 13. If you're a Michigan fan, like you still want to see a lot more from the offense. And they were able to run the football in the first half, but it kind of went away in the second half. It's still a really good defense. And for those who didn't watch that game or watch that game, like if Michigan can replicate what they did in the first half against USC in terms of running the football, keeping the defense off the field, keeping your defense fresh, most importantly, I think Michigan can win a lot of football games. And I'm a Michigan fan. Many of you guys know that. I look at Michigan and say it's hard to see them beating teams like Oregon and beating teams like Ohio State with how one-dimensional they are right now. USC at 13, I think that's fair. Again, Michigan, USC, they just played yesterday. I'm not totally convinced that the better team won. And that's not a shot at Michigan, but you take a look at it, was kind of a tale of two halves. I think USC, they got to fix that offensive line. Like they got their tails whooped, and that was a problem. They're playing significantly better defense. Michigan was able to hit kind of three explosive plays that changed that game. Obviously had a pick six. Outside of like four plays, that game could have been not very competitive in USC's favor. Miller Moss, I think, is a gamer. Like I think a lot of people kind of assume that this USC offense would take a massive step back with Miller Moss at quarterback. Look, it ain't going to be as flashy as it was with Caleb Williams. Miller Moss is a gamer, was probably put to the ground 20 plus times in that football game, got back up, continued to make high level throws. Really big fan of USC. 14 LSU. Still question marks about the defense. And I get they made significant changes on the defensive side of the football. My bigger concern is, quite frankly, just the personnel. Like you can make all the changes you want on defense. Why is Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Texas, why are they all the best defenses in the country year after year? It's because they recruit at that level. And I just don't know if LSU has that elite personnel on the defensive side of the football yet to be a really good defense. And UCLA is, I don't think, is a very good team. And LSU was in it with them in the second half at home. I think that concerns a lot of LSU fans. Louisville at 15 is, look, we're going to find out about that real quick. Louisville playing Notre Dame this weekend. That's going to be a fascinating football game where, you look at Louisville and say, Jeff Brom is just dialing it up. Like he knows how to hit the explosive plays on offense. I think they have a super underrated defense that forces turnovers, that can get after the passer. I think the big question about Louisville is that talent differential. Do they have the talent to compete with even teams behind them like Notre Dame and Clemson, or teams above them like LSU and USC? That's probably the question, but I think they're very well coached. I think Tyler Shuck is a very good quarterback when he is healthy. Louisville's a fascinating one. Notre Dame, just talked about him. Clemson, just talked about him. I think they're a little low on Clemson. Like I think they're holding that loss week one against Georgia, against Clemson, a little too much. And then you're seeing kind of some other teams kind of get slided or let slide with some jewel. Iowa State, solid team. I probably would agree with Iowa State being 18. 19 Illinois, one of the more impressive wins that we saw over the weekend, going on the road Friday night, beating Nebraska, moving the football on Nebraska. That was the biggest storyline. This defense is massively improved. You watch that game back. Dylan Raiola had to make some high-level throws for Nebraska to move the football. My bigger storyline is this is a Nebraska defense that is hard to move the football against, especially on the ground. Illinois ran the football for 166 yards. That's massive for Illinois. I think Luke Altmaier's playing really good. I think they have a team that Brett Bielema wants, which is controlling the line of scrimmage, running the football, staying on the field. Illinois is going to be a tough out for a lot of teams in the Big Ten. Oklahoma State, again, just not quite sold on them. Oklahoma, 21, significant problems with the offensive line that got exposed against a really good Tennessee front seven. Making a quarterback switch. I'm fine with Oklahoma at 21, quite frankly, because I think this defense is so legit. But all the injuries on the offensive line to the pass catchers, making the switch at quarterback, there's big-time question marks about Oklahoma on the offensive side of the football. BYU, sneaky undefeated team. They beat SMU on the road, who just beat a TCU team that I think a lot of people liked a lot, and then beat Kansas State at home this weekend by a significant margin. You don't want to play in Provo, Utah. We'll probably leave it at that. Kansas State probably shouldn't be in the top 25 with a loss to that extent against BYU. And again, I think it has a lot more to do with me not really loving that Arizona team. And I don't know if that win was as impressive as many people might think. But again, Kansas State, Avery Johnson, DJ Giddens, Dylan Edwards, they can run the football. I think they can play solid defense. Again, another team that's going to be a tough out. I think they just kind of had a bad performance against BYU. Texas A&M at 24. They moved up a spot, beating Bowling Green by, I believe the score finished a 6-point win. I think Texas A&M was the much better team throughout that football game from what I saw. They got a really good defense. Marcel Reed's given some juice to that offense. I think you still have question marks about the offense. And then Boise State, one of the best players in college football. They played Oregon quite tough, and Oregon seems to be the team that we might have thought they were in the preseason. I'm okay with having Boise State at 25. Quite frankly, you could argue that Boise State maybe should be higher. We'll cut it out there. Oh, I do want to mention some teams that I think should be in the top 25. Indiana in the Big Ten, like quietly, Chris Signetti is turning around that team. Indiana, I think, might be legit. Washington State. John Mateer is one of the more electric players to watch in all of college football. They had a very impressive win against Washington. They beat San Jose State, who I think is a solid football team. It wasn't as impressive as you might have liked. Washington State's gritty. So Indiana, Washington State, two of the teams that I would be keeping an eye on in the top 25, potentially seeing them in the top 25 after week 5. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Again, appreciate all the support y'all have shown the fellas. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.